Well, first, congratulations on a tour de force of a book, Eve, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution. So I really loved its lyricism, and I was talking to you a little bit about, it's such a sciencey subject. And it's so entertaining and accessible and affectionate and kind towards the sort of mouse weasels and the frailties of Homo sapiens. And there are laugh out loud moments, and there are many moments that make you stop short and ruminate on your vaginal cavity, your nipple distribution, bipedalism, all three together. And
if you don't have a vagina, you could ruminate on your other cavities. It's really up to you.
Yeah, or other people's cavities, although not on the subway. No,
we don't judge. We don't police here.
And throughout there are questions: is sexism useful for evolution? Are our bodies at war with our babies? Is a human body built for endurance, and a female body in particular? I thought we could loosely follow the structure of the book and its topics and the imagined Eves, or the evolutionary sort of moments or creatures that Cat introduces us to. And then we'll move on to a discussion of our present moment in politics and women's health research, and hopefully some happy future gazing at the end, because...
Yeah, my country's on fire.
We are going to get to that, yeah.
Yeah, but we're here.
So I'm going to ventriloquize you to the thesis, if that's okay.
Okay.
Being sex permeates every feature of our mammalian bodies and the lives we live inside them. But for over a century, the female body has been radically left out of biological and medical research. That's beginning to change. And what we are learning about the biology of sex differences is rewriting the story of humanity. Cat realised we needed a user's manual for the female body, a well-researched and readable account of what we are. But it's a complex origin story. The stories of our long evolution and the many environments we adapted to live in are written on our bodies. And it's the story of our mothers, our many mothers. So before we get on to the Eves, you said about the sort of constellation of moments that led you to write the book. It's the obvious question in these talks, but could you tell us a few of those moments that instigated this book?
Why did I decide it was somehow a good idea to write about 200 million years of our bodies? A light topic, wildly unambitious. Well, I mean, as a super femme presenting chick, there are many triggering moments in my life. But I think probably the central moment I usually talk about happened in a movie theater. Yeah. So I opened the book with this because it's just like, well, yeah. Right. 2012, I'm a PhD student at Columbia University in New York. And I'm a big sci-fi fan, right? So I'm definitely going to go see this prequel to Alien. So this is a very subtle title for a movie. It was called Prometheus. And so I'm sitting in the crowd. Dr. Elizabeth Shaw is our final girl. Terrible things are going to happen to her, and somehow we're going to enjoy that, and she's going to live at the end, and we're going to have ambivalent feelings about the fact that she's alive, right? That's the usual journey for these things. But in this scene, she has been impregnated with a vicious alien squid, and she wants what any reasonable person would want in this scenario. She wants it out. She would like to not have an alien squid inside of her vajayjay. She wants that. So she goes to the future of medicine, which is a med pod, a kind of sexy coffin with like lasers, which can cure your space cancer. Or in this case, she asks it for a C-section, right? Out with the squid. And it says, beep boop, I'm sorry, this med pod is calibrated for male patients only. Please seek medical assistance elsewhere. Right? And what follows is this like really baller scene where she gives herself a C-section with lasers and staples and then shambles off to more adventures, which is great. There's a lot of blood and writhing tentacles. And again, she somehow survives. But when I'm watching this happen as she's lasering herself open, I hear a woman in the row behind me say, well, shit, who does that? Exactly. Who does that? Who sends a multi-trillion-dollar expedition into space and forgets to make sure the medical equipment works on women? But I knew that was us. That's actually all of us in this room already. In fact, if you have ovaries, you're already kind of Dr. Elizabeth Shaw. Because for a very, very long time, as I knew, up in neuroscience up at Columbia, you only studied males unless you had a good reason to study sex differences or females. Yeah. And that was to control for estrus. That was actually not sexism. It was good science run amok. Because you want to control for your confounds, man. You want to know how to interpret your data. So, well, every tissue in our body has sex hormone receptors, just about, if you're a mammal. We only barely understand how they work because we weren't studying them, but we know that they're there. And so if you have a menstrual cycle, estrus cycle, it produces this cascade of hormones that goes up and down in a cycle that depends on your species, but it's always happening, right? You have that cyclicity. And so how do you control for that? If you don't really know what it's doing, well, you just don't study the female. And that was effectively the decision in the biomedical sciences, in basic biology, dealing with mammals for, well, kind of forever, but deeply for about half a century. And it's starting to get better, which is awesome, but there's a lot of gaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought we could talk about the gender health gap, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Some of the stats that you point out, I think it's 96 to 2006, 79% of animal studies published in scientific journal Pain included only male subjects.
Cheers.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, isn't it? And then you point out the profound and damaging implications. So the antidepressants and pain medications are considered gender neutral, despite the evidence they affect women very differently to men. Are those kind of couple of the most egregious ongoing problems with the gender health gap, would you say? Or
so the pain thing is especially a problem because we already know, and this has been pretty robustly studied now, that female pain, the pain of female patients, is disbelieved in the clinic. It tends to be thought of as less severe than how the patient reports. Some of you may have had this experience. It tends to be rated lower than the patient rates it. Now, pain ratings are complicated, and we don't need to get into the science of that, but generally speaking, female pain is disbelieved. If you're a woman of color, it's even worse. But it's also true that this is coming into a clinical environment in which the clinician, as well-meaning, as often she, actually this is true whether or not the clinician is herself female, is underprepared. Because, of course, the bedrock of studies that help us understand how pain works, its mechanisms, how dosing should apply, etc., is in a very male-heavy model, which means that the clinician expects things to work when that clinician maybe shouldn't. So it's not necessarily simply a case of sexism or bad action. It's a case of undermining the entire clinical environment.
With poor data.
From that whole research pipeline. So that's the thing to fix, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not much, is it?
Yeah. Although, actually, unlike a lot of things that are deeply wrong with the world, it is fixable.
And that's something that we can talk about, sort of positive moves at the end.
Yeah.
What about the Eves then? Could you, without going into too much detail, describe, I guess, why you decided this structure, if there are any Eves that didn't make the cut?
So the reason I decided on this structure, that essentially your body isn't just one thing. It's actually many complex systems that each evolve at different points in time. Your intestines in many ways are wildly old. You're still squeezing food and turn it into poop, much the way you have for a very long time. But your forebrains, your massive forebrains and the way that they work, well, that's a very recent upgrade. And it's about as buggy as you would imagine if you've ever upgraded your iPhone. So if the body is not one thing, it actually evolves these traits that make us human. They evolve at different points in time. Then that means we don't just have one Eden. We actually have billions in truth, but we have a few key ones that really make us the sorts of animals we really are. We have the things that make us mammalian, that make us eutherians, that make us primates, that make us, the creatures that we are, and we say, along this chain of evolution, here we are humans. So what I did is I found Eves for each Eden. I sat down with a dear friend of mine, a paleontologist, and we said, okay, LCAs, last common ancestors for milk. What do we got? Last common ancestor for uterus that gives birth the way that we do. When did that happen? Primate sensory arrays. When the hell we get monkey-like? How do we, and all the way up the chain. And so it wasn't just a narrative device of like, here's some cool anchors. It's also because this is why we study rats. It's the assumption of the conservation of traits.
Yeah.
The reason you can do a rat model of diabetes is because there's the assumption that we're still kind of doing that, processing of sucrose in a similar mammalian way. So this could work.
It is also a cool structure. I mean, because you're very poetic, obviously, as a sort of your poetry background, and the way the kind of characters come to life with these sort of discursive introductions. But did anything not make the cut? I guess there had to be those evolutionary moments.
Yes. The book used to be 150 pages longer. My editors did a heroic job helping me say things shorter. But also I had a whole chapter on hair, on fur, right? Because everyone's convinced that mammalian fur is super important for mammals, and it's not.
So it's a misconception. I mean,
it's true that mammalian skin does make hair follicles, and the hair follicles make shit out of keratin and then push it out the surface. That definitely happens. Yes. Skin's really good at making things out of keratin. Just your fingernails made out of keratin. The idea that skin would make things out of keratin is not a major novel thing. And the pterosaurs had hair fuzz on them anyway. And it didn't turn out to be that we were better at regulating temperature, because actually the dinosaur line was also warm-blooded. And I was like, And then also it would have to be the first, because it goes in order in the book, from earliest trait to arise and then forward. And so then the earliest trait to arise, I am immediately now wrestling with race, obviously, because, if you're saying how did the trait evolve and how does it play out now? And is that how I'm going to, as this white chick writing about science, now say stuff about my biracial children? Oh, let's not actually. Yeah. Let's not open the book that way. So I didn't. But also Nina Jablonski, read her book. She has very interesting things about how we lost our hair.
But on that point, actually, your kind of deftness with dealing with the sort of, you say diversity is a feature, not a bug of bodies.
Yes.
And dealing with the lack of kind of binarized sex bodies, and dealing with kind of trans individuality through, you do it very adroitly, and it's not really playing into any gender wars. Was that conscious?
Well, you might notice from how I speak, I'm not much of a politician. And so, no, I didn't have a kind of trying to thread the needle thing as I was doing it. It was more that the topic is huge. It's our bodies. That means I'm immediately dealing with a very intimate topic, dealing with a very loaded topic, the center of pretty much all taboo. And not everything is about everything all the time. And so, as a queer chick and as a person who's been in activism since the 90s, I wanted to talk about these things when it mattered to the topic at hand.
Yeah.
Because actually there can be a kind of pointlessness of waving the flag when you're not even talking about that at the moment. So queer bodies are totally understudied. Women should relate to that broadly. And so when there was a moment where it was like, oh, it'd be so cool if we knew more about X, I say that.
Yep.
If there's a cool study that actually is relevant that has been done, like how many trans women who've been on hormone therapy, so long as they don't smoke, have better heart measures after about a decade of being on that hormone therapy. Well, that's an aging story. That's a senescence story. That's interesting. So then I'm doing my advocacy, I'm doing my work, but it's relevant to the science I'm talking about.
And more understudied bodies, and even more understudied,
Yeah, exactly.
So in milk, like all mammals, we nurse our young with a cloying, watery goo that we secrete from specialized glands on our torso. You go into my breasts are high on our chest, or thinking around why we have 2 rather than 8, which would be quite cool.
Although why the bras would be really annoying.
And why they are surrounded by fatty tissue in very varying degrees, as demonstrated by us both.
Yeah. I know.
And why it's sexually, we know why it's sort of considered culturally sexually attractive, this sort of adipose tissue that makes no sense. Could you describe, I was really interested in the communication between breast and suckling child, that it's a 2-way communication.
Oh, you want to do that, suck? You should understand these things that are, you're looking anyway, whatever, that are hanging off my chest wall as a 2-way communication platform, but not in the way you may be thinking about what they are or not culturally communicating to you in this dress. Not that. Let's say you're a newborn. So here's a breast. And if you're a newborn, if you need to breastfeed, you're going to latch on to this thing. Your lips are going to splay out, and you're going to take a surprising amount of breast tissue into your mouth, lamprey-like. And that is what's called proper latching. And what that does, because you see, when milk evolves, there's no nipple yet. That is a much later evolutionary upgrade. Once you have a nipple, you can have a docking seal. So that means you're forming a vacuum. That's what suckling is in this case. You are forming a docking seal, and you are forming mini vacuums in the space of your oral cavity by sucking in your cheek, rolling your tongue back and forth, and sucking down gulps of milk, which then stimulates the breast to release milk. You don't need to know all that. Okay, what's interesting about this is that because you're moving the focus of the vacuum back and forth within this enclosed space, and because fluidics are what they are, what you're creating is a tide, much like you see at the shore at Brighton. So you have that wave of milk coming in on the top that they're going to then swallow down, and with every tide, there is an undertow under every wave, back and forth. Back and forth. So the baby's spit is then sucked back up into the mom's boob through the holes in her nipple, where it then distributes through her ductal work and is read like some kind of weird ancient code that by an army of like immunoagents and sensors of various types that then change the milk to suit. If the kid is sick, the milk changes. We know this in rat, we know this in monkey, and we have evidence for it in human. So yes, milk is a co-produced biological product that functions as a kind of transmission of signal and immunomodulating system. It's the only thing in the animal world quite like it.
It's amazing, isn't it? So it's about city planning in a sense.
Very much so. Yeah. Because especially for the neonate, the first thing it needs to do is basically give you diarrhea. It cleans out the infant's gut, and all that meconium, it goes out, and then sets up a useful infrastructure for commensal bacteria to fend off infection, and also, in ways we're still figuring out, intersect with toll-like receptors and a number of other things in that early immune gut brain connection that shapes a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I also loved your theory about the how wet nurses led to the development of human cities, because when I was preparing for this, I found, a friend, a local builder, had found a flyer tucked in a cavity wall when he was doing some work, and it was from Brighton Hospital near here. And it had advertisements for wet nurses. It was the Edwardian period, and it had a recipe for making your own milk that had condensed milk and sugar in it.
Ooh.
That was so it's
I didn't even know we condensed milk in the Edwardian period. That's cool.
So.
Probably a good way to kill bacteria, actually, if you're cooking it.
But so I loved your theory of wet nurses. Yeah.
It isn't just mine.
Okay.
So I found some papers hidden away in weird little scholarly journals. You know, we love them, don't we? Yeah. So a lot of the book, it's all very grounded in the science, but of course, fundamentally, it's a kind of series of thought experiments. It says, okay, if we haven't really been asking the question, does it matter if you're male or female in this moment of evolution? Does it matter in this functionality? If you're female, well, what if it did? Then what? So there is endless writing about the rise of urbanization, especially in the Middle East, in ancient Sumer and elsewhere, and how did they build up populations? And there are a lot of stories about agriculture. But there's a lot of writing about it. What's interesting to me when I was doing this book is how little of it ever takes into account the basic mechanics of human reproduction. To build populations, you don't just need to feed them. You must literally whelp them. You do actually have to. It's the only way we can do it, people. We have to have it come out of a body to make a body, which then grows populations, builds cities, right? You don't arrive at density without bodies in a space. Yeah. So how do you make the bodies?
With all the sickness risk that entails.
So there's always knock-on effects with greater density. You get more infection. There are all sorts of things. We've written a bit about that. But of actual birthing pacing, very, very little. But I found this really cool paper. You may or may not know that when a body lactates, it tends to suppress ovulation. It makes us infertile temporarily. So it's an imperfect suppressor of ovulation, imperfect downregulation of your fertility. But many, many human cultures have had this practice of wet nursing. That means you take your baby, you give it to someone else to suckle, but often in the case where you would then stop nursing yourself and the other person is doing that. So that's great. That means that you have ovaries that are coming online sooner than they would otherwise, presumably. However, because it's an imperfect suppressant, it doesn't perfectly make you not ovulate. It's also true that you're not arriving at a full fertility swap, obviously. So basically, the two of you together are having more babies as a unit of two those two females are having babies more often than they would have had they simply been nursing their own babies. Just by fertility patterns. That's just how that works. What was really cool is in ancient demography studies, in other words, studies of ancient populations, cities that had cultures that had a lot of wet nursing had massive population swells. And cities that had cultures that discouraged wet nursing tended to be much, much smaller, which is to say the practice of wet nursing is a good way to make ancient populations grow really fast, for good and for ill. So if growing populations is how you make cities, well, then it's actually a boob story. Yeah.
And a fascinating and lost population of wet nurses. You'd quite like to know some of their identities, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, until, unfortunately, it's also true that the people doing the wet nursing are often... Class is tricky when you're talking about ancient Sumer. It's not the same as class now, but there are more empowered people and less empowered people. So often the less empowered people are doing the wet nursing. So you also are creating a few generations down a really fertile ground for coups and rebellions.
Let's move on to the uterus.
Oh, shall we?
A war zone. It isn't a lush pillow, it's a war zone.
Yes.
Yeah. And ours may be one of the deadliest. Human women menstruate because it's part of how we manage to survive blood-sucking human fetuses.
I think I called them blood-sucking demon fetuses.
Oh, demon!
No, but they're lovely and I love my kids.
Yeah. It's quite iconoclastic in this idea of how the trade-offs, the sort of bloody stalemate of pregnancy as you describe it. Can you tell us how that kind of maps onto the human uterus as it sort of evolved, and the placenta?
The uterus, if you've got one, so it evolved from actually two organs, the shell glands. Birds still have two, mice still have two. Ours effectively merged into one kind of pear-shaped object. And in fact, many people, many women born with a uterus will still have some evidence of that evolutionary legacy. Many of us are slightly heart-shaped. Some of us still have a septate, a kind of fibrous wall between the two. Some of us are even born with two whole separate uteri. It's usually not great for your fertility, but sometimes it can work. Yeah, so it's not always true that these kinds of birth defects tell an evolutionary story, but in this case, they really do. But the thing that's weird about the uterus is it's like, because the placenta docks on, that is the transmission point between the maternal body and the fetal body, that sort of bloody negotiating space. It's actually an organ made out of two things. The basal plate is made out of the maternal uterus, and the top plate is made out of fetal tissue. Again, one of the only organs made out of effectively two bodies. Weird, creepy, really. And the thing, it's negotiating exchange, basically. This is where the fetus is trying to get as much as it can out of you, long evolved to do so, drive to survive and thrive, etc. And the maternal body has much longer evolved to stay alive. Actually, just stay alive. That's kind of the goal there. And so there's a tension between the two. And what's interesting about our method of menstruating, which is shedding that material lining. So the interesting thing about how we do what we do is that unlike most mammals, we don't wait for a signal from a fertilized egg to start building up our uterine lining. Most mammals aren't just constantly cycling through lining in this way in their estrus cycles. They usually build it up. Most build it up in response to a kind of chemical signal from that fertilized egg coming down the tube. We do it, and a handful of other species have this. We have this spontaneous decidualization. And the thing that we all have in common is that we have really invasive placentas. A lot of placentas are kind of like a shallow dish, doesn't penetrate real deep, and then it just kind of pops off when you give birth. Okay, fine. Ours penetrates all the way down into the maternal bloodstream. Like, it really gets its damn tentacles in there. Like, it's really, really in there, which is metabolically costly, which is dangerous to detach, which is a lot of things. So the theory goes is we actually build up our uterine lining in this way because it's trench warfare. Because we're actually trying to build a kind of buffer, not to supply the child necessarily, though that's great, and we have evolved that as well, but actually to provide some distance between this incredibly greedy model of a placenta and a body that would like to not die.
Obviously, during the process of writing the book, you had 2 children. And did you conceive of this sort of succubi type relationship? How did you feel about it?
Yeah. So I was pregnant like 6 times. I have 2 children. The other 4 that I know of, the other 4 were elaborate miscarriages of varying types. And I'm totally alive, and I appreciate that. I have excellent doctors. So I had, so the feeling that it was trying to kill me was present. Was present.
Yeah, quite sci-fi.
Yeah, when you hemorrhage, you're like, you are trying to kill me, aren't you? So in and out of ERs with that. But I'd say that it took me 10 years to write this book, right? So this is my 30s. And so in many ways, it's while I was doing the PhD, so it was kind of like crawling inside my head. But I can say that, like, I started to get a little suspicious. I'm an atheist, right? But I started to get a little superstitious. Like, while I was doing the first draft of the uterus chapter, I had an ectopic pregnancy. A later draft of the milk chapter, I got mastitis while breastfeeding.
You're living the content.
Yeah, so I was like, I really can't write the menopause chapter.
So legs. Can you tell me why I should blame Ardy for my meniscus knee tear and plantar fasciitis?
It's nice to have someone to blame, ain't it?
Yeah, I'm now blaming her.
Ardipithecus ramidus. So this is an amazing fossil. And we had it for decades before we knew what it was. It's our first real evidence of when our ancestors or near ancestors began walking upright. What's true of Ardy, which is interesting, is that, like us, as soon as she was upright, she was putting a lot of pressure on that knee joint because that's absorbing a lot of force. Her feet weren't as good as ours at upright walking. She still had that opposable kind of thumb happening down there. You know, she didn't have as rigid a structure, which actually helps distribute force and stabilizes as we do. But like us, more than likely, if she were female, and they assume she is, she was a little bit more flexible, more yoga. Typical females of reproductive age, no matter which kind of primate you are, but especially us, tend to have more of this stuff circulating in our blood called relaxin. So named because that's what it does. It kind of loosens the anchors at your joints, if you like. When you're pregnant, you get a ton of it. It way upregulates, and then that's part of what lets your pelvic structure become wider. But it's also true that we have a baseline higher amount of it, which means that when we go walking, we bipedal female humans, our joints are a little looser. Does actually kind of make us a little better at yoga. That's the thing. But it also means that when we wear high heels like these things, because our femurs are coming into the knee joint at a little more of an angle because our hips are wider, and because our joints are a little bit less stabilized, we wobble a little more when we walk. And when we're in high heels, it's even worse. Actually, if anything, the more ideal leg to put on a high heel is a male one. You'll get less damage, both to your lower back and to your knees. But they don't always make them in your sizes. I apologize.
Apart from the 18th century, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, actually. Yeah, it was for horseback riding.
Do you have time to tell us about Captain Greased? It's Greased, isn't it?
Sure, if you want. I use her as an anchor for the legs chapter because she was one of the first candidates in the U.S. Army Ranger School, which is about as butch an environment as you can possibly imagine, okay? So this is one of these things where you are being tested by the U.S. Army for your fitness and your leadership potential for forward battle, effectively, right? So you don't just need to be like Army fit, you need to be like officer forward motion fit, all right? You need to be ready for the war theater, as it were. So it's a huge barrage of physical tests, very masculine-leaning tests, that's meant to test the limits of a body to see what you can do and test the limits of your stamina to see what you can do under difficult conditions. And for a long time, women were not allowed to do this. But then one year, they allowed women to participate without anticipating necessarily that they would succeed, but for the optics of letting them try. Of course, it was a political moment. But also because the U.S. Army, we have a volunteer army, right? So we have a recruitment problem. And so there is discussion among the ranks of what's called lowering standards. Should we lower standards because we need to get more people in the ranks? And so this one colonel was like, well, let's let them do Army Ranger School. And then, of course, if they don't pass, then you can't say, well, this is the standard. And if they do pass, that also kind of works, right? Because, well, only a few could possibly. So then we should keep it as it is. We don't lower the standards because if they can. So either way, it's a win-win for them. So I follow her story as she makes it through as a way of exploring what we mean by saying that a human body is strong. Because actually it really depends what you're asking it to do. And there are some things that female bodies are really good at that male bodies kind of suck at, and vice versa, which is just the features of our puberties. But of course, once you're in like Army Ranger School, you're already an exceptional being. It's kind of like the Olympics. Like Olympian bodies, have you seen Michael Phelps? He's like an alien, dude. Like he's all lung and limb and like the tiniest pelvis you've ever seen. It's not an average body by any stretch. So of course, once you're in those sports, you're already pre-selecting.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of amazing that I guess you use her to demonstrate stamina and the fact that sort of the bodies that we conceive of as strong, the masculine bodies.
Yes. I use it to pick apart what we mean by strong and what female strength is often in terms of bouts of endurance. Yeah. That all the way down to cellular metabolism, there seems to be something really, really interesting about endurance and being female.
So I think I first came across the book when I think you were on a radio show and you were discussing the obstetric dilemma, and I think you were talking about the need to get human babies melons out of a really small pelvic opening the size of a lemon. And I remember that being quite kind of conjuring. So you're very good on the obstetric dilemma and the deep history of gynecology and why we're here at all.
Yes.
Part of the kind of rehabilitation, I guess, of the midwife. Your argument is gynecology is a technology, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very,
the
very
most
much
important technology, that would you say?
Yeah. So I've hung out with the paleo crowd quite a bit now. So the thing about paleoanthropologists is that this is the deep secret, they don't actually give a shit about rocks. They know a lot about rocks, like these stone axes. And they know a lot about strata. They know a lot about rocks, but they don't actually care about the rock for the rock. Because tool use is a kind of triangulation, right? You have the purported tool, say the stone axe, what have you. You have the known environment, and you have a user who has a goal. So the imagined user, this creature, is trying to overcome some bodily limitation, some challenge to achieve that goal, and they're using the tool to achieve the goal. That's the story of what technological innovation is really all about, right? Which is to say they're all closet behaviorists. So the point, when you say what's our most important tool, well, you can't say stone axes. Actually, primates generally use stones and a number of other things in tool-like environments and often directly as tools, right? And in fact, chimps will make spears out of sapling branches to slaughter bush babies. Mostly females, actually, are the ones who do that in Senegal. So the chimps, that is. So I was trying to figure out how to write the chapter, the tools chapter. You have to write about tool use. It's a really big thing for our species. You have to. But what was the most important tool? So then I say, okay, well, let me come back to my triangle. All right. So we have goals, and the basic goal is survival. What's our most important bodily limitation then? That becomes the most important question. What sucks about our body that we can then innovate around to then improve our lot? And I was like, oh, I know that one. We suck at making babies. We actually, and I looked into it, it's quantifiable suckage, that actually our pregnancies and our births and our postpartum recoveries are, by most measures, longer and harder and more prone to dangerous complications than they are for basically any other primate, except for a squirrel monkey. We feel bad for her. She's at term, her babies are, I think, 17% of her body weight. That is so large. That's like 2 regulation weight bowling balls in your trousers, gentlemen. That's a lot to pass out through you. And they too have that obstetric dilemma. But though the placentas aren't as bad because they all overall are smaller, so their gestations aren't as less time to do as much damage.
Gravity to get it.
Yeah. Because we got those greedy placentas, right? So it's like, okay, so if that's our biggest problem, and once we started to walk upright, our pelvic opening became narrower, and so then we also had a mechanical problem of getting increasingly big-headed babies out of a increasingly weirdly shaped and narrow hole. So, well, we know what it looks like when species have issues with reproduction. In evolutionary biology, that's the hard problem. You can limp around on one foot. You can have one giant stupid claw that you wave at the ladies, which then makes you eaten more by gulls, actually. The fiddler crabs die a lot. But, like, if you're bad at making babies, then you're not going to... This is not 8 billion people predictive. Yeah. This is not like we're going to definitely succeed. No, we should be like the giant panda. We should be like any of a host of species that are kind of bad at sex or bad at babies and are tucked away in an ecological pocket and are sliding towards extinction. And we are not, because we invented gynecology. Lucy, the Australopithecine, had a midwife. Yeah. And so did all of her descendants. Yeah. We got better at making this suck less. And that's how our species even evolved. The social species, yeah. Yeah, we did it by being brilliant. We did it by being social. We did it by collaborating. We did it by being less competitive. But the main thing we had to overcome was just
helping each other birth.
Yeah. And be pregnant and up or down regulate your fertility as suits your local environment. Yeah.
Well, I do want to get onto the gorilla testicles, so I'm not going to do a lot on brain.
You do want to.
I do want to, the big balls.
Yeah.
I want to get onto the giant balls. So would you rather talk about the truth of the mom brain or the Clintons' voices?
But you want to do mom brain?
Yeah, if you want to do yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are you talking about how our brains shrink when we're pregnant?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the weird thing about pregnant person's brain is during the third trimester, it shrinks. It's not a huge amount. And then regrows after you give birth and or your pregnancy stops even. For a while, we wondered if it was literally material source because the brain actually has a lot of these special lipids in it that baby brains also need to grow. So we wondered if the baby was cannibalizing the mother's brain and that was why it was shrinking. And there were a number of studies on this and that was worrying. But the dominant theory right now is not about that, but rather the reason a pregnant lady's brain shrinks is that it's rewiring. It actually happens in puberty as well. That you get this massive scissoring away of synaptic connections. It's a pruning that then blooms in new social contexts and with new social learning. And you got a lot of social learning to do when you have an incredibly useless newborn. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Like keeping it alive is a whole lot of social learning. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the dominant theory for why our brains shrink. But it's also, of course, now a major site for investigating things like postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety and a bunch of other things. It does recover. Okay, it's not the case that we walk around the rest of our lives if we've given birth with hampered ass
play
brain.
Into sort of sex.
No. We're fine. We're fine. It just takes a minute.
Well, onto menopause, because it cuts through so much theorising. I don't know if you've got the same in the States, but here it's such a menopause moment at the moment, and there's a lot of hucksterism around it, and there's this big sort of moment of like a revolution or a speaking out about the menopause. So we're at a big menopause moment. And there's a lot about the grandmother hypothesis that you discount, actually, or that you work through, and that's not your hypothesis, but that seems to be quite culturally salient still.
Yeah. So I've been on the road kind of intensely since the book came out in fall 2023, which is a privilege. And it's not like a humble brag. I'm like, oh, it's so hard on me or whatever. But it was a learning curve. I had to learn how to talk to y'all. And I did learn that it seems very important to not ask if anyone has ever been through menopause in the room. Which I swear to God, I didn't know that'd be a problem. But it was so awkward. It was so awkward. There was always like this one really liberated chick who's like, doesn't have a bra. Just swinging, and it's great. And I love her and I embrace her and she's totally my aunt, right? But like, and then there were a lot of other people who were like, don't do this to me right now, because the lights would come up and I don't do that anymore. Because it's so taboo. Okay, we're having a moment. It's in the magazines. We're doing, but it's still taboo. People are still uncomfortable admitting that they're in their 50s. Weirdly, because I guess that means that you're supposed to die now. But scientifically, that was also the theory that basically it was treated very much and still is as a kind of biological mystery. Why stop making babies if the goal is to continually selfish gene pass on your genes? Why stop doing that? That seems like a bad idea. Why stop ovulating and still see? By definition, menopause, the way we do it, it's not simply that you've stopped ovulating, you stop getting your period in your 50s usually, but that you then live a full third of your potential average lifespan after that. The entire story of menopause is actually that you're not dead. You're not dead. That's actually the point. And the biologists were like, but why aren't you dead? And that played out in the scientific papers for decades. And so there was this idea of the what's called the grandmother hypothesis. Well, our babies are so needy. They're so costly, we would say, to care for. Can't even hold up their damn heads for like a while. You need to do that as a living being. So maybe if you stop making babies, then you're free to take care of your daughter's babies. It's like the evolutionary nursery. It's free daycare. And I am definitely here on this stage because someone is watching my children. So I appreciate this story very much. My mother-in-law, who is postmenopausal, is totally doing that, along with the father of these children, by the way. Thank you. So that's the idea. And then maybe also a side note of that theory is that maybe you're competing with your daughter less for mates because you can't have babies anymore. But we now know that we share this kind of menopause with very few other species. It's basically us and about 4 species of toothed whale. And these specific kinds of orca that have been well studied now, transient orcapods, are matriarchal and menopausal. And those menopausal matriarchs are in charge of the pod. They determine where the pod goes to hunt and so on and so forth. What's interesting is they don't spend extra time caring for that third generation. They don't spend a lot of time on the babies. Their sons stay with them their whole lives, which is interesting. Very much a mama's boy, if you're a killer whale. And if she dies, you die soon after, no matter how old you are. But what they do that is distinguishable, that is true more of the older members of the group. When local food supplies run out, they lead them to the more rare sources of food. And they lead them to the more rewarding sources of food, the fattier fish or what have you. They also seem really instrumental in teaching specialized hunting techniques. When you may have seen a video online, a group of killer whales will kind of bum rush an ice floe, and then the bow wake will wash a seal off of that slab of ice. It's a kind of coordinated hunting technique. It's really cool for the killer whales, bad day for the seal. But yeah, so they seem to be instrumental in teaching those younger generations how to do it. But it's not about childcare.
Wise grandmothers.
It's simply that they know things. They are old enough to have wisdom, which is a pretty good story for human grandmothers as well. So it's just simply, the story then is not just about that your ovaries stopped. The story is that we evolved to live longer. The whole species evolved to live longer.
It's a good story. Yeah,
absolutely. And our ovaries didn't catch up. They're still running the old monkey plan that we'd be dead by 50.
Love. I think your thesis about why did Homo sapiens invent sexism, I think that's a really important core of the love chapter. Yeah.
Yes. So a lot of people asked me what the basal human mating strategy would be. So let me make that human language. In the deep history, the 300,000-year history of our species, about which, to be clear, we know very little. We're real impressed that we know stuff about the last 10,000 years. That is not a significant portion of our species. But of that, how did we go about organizing our sex lives? I got this question a lot. Was it more like King Solomon and his many wives, which is like gorillas, so that's polygyny. So you got your dominant male and a bunch of females. Was that it? Was that how we usually did it? Was it more like chimps and bonobos, which is just have sex with anything with a hole, just anything. Could be a tree, just anything. They're very randy is the point. Or were we more like wolves, actually? The reason they're alpha wolves is not like in captivity. It's actually that usually wild wolf populations are the mom and the dad. And that's why the other wolves aren't having sex with the mom, because it's the mom, and that's why she's the main one having the babies. So, in other words, were we more monogamous? And was that our major organizational principle? And I basically did the only rational thing, and I said, well, we can't look at human history to know that, because it's a very small fraction of what our species has ever done. And the victor writes, the history anyway. And so actually we've now learned there's lots of matriarchies and lots of other kinds of, so it's like, well, we can look at the body because primatologists do know that there are certain kinds of physiological traits that are associated with certain kinds of mating patterns in a given species. If you've got a mostly harem-based structure in primates, you're going to have a really big dude and much smaller females, because he has to spend all of his time defending his harem and intimidating the other guys, and it's a whole thing, and you really don't actually want to fight the other guys. You just want to beat your chest because the whole point, is to look intimidating enough to not be damaged. And if you are promiscuous, there's another story. There's ball size. So gorilla males have big guy, teeny tiny little testicles. And the reason for that is that he doesn't have to make that many sperm. It's costly to build testicular tissue. So if you're not going to build a lot of excess sperm-making tissue, if you don't need to compete with as many other sperm makers. So why waste it? Why have a body plan that wastes that? So he doesn't. It is true that I think about a third of his harem's offspring are actually by sneaky males. But that's also true of horses, actually. That's actually true in most of these harem societies. So he's still batting all right. Chimps, on the other hand,
Chimps with a big
it's
balls.
astonishing they can stand up. It's just... It's just so much ball, like it's almost to the knee. It's just why, and it's because they're incredibly promiscuous, which means that their swimmers are often in close proximity of competition with other sperm. Do you see? So you have to blitzkrieg the cervix with as many as you possibly can in the hopes that you could possibly have a subsequent generation, right? Not only that, but you also have something that's called a seminal plug. So chimps, these are great. Oh man, primatologists collect these things from the forest floor like jewels. They're hardened little plugs that are actually hardened semen that have fallen out of the female's vagina. What they are is that their sperm actually basically coagulates. It's not quite, but it forms this kind of rubbery plug that blocks other guys' sperm. Right? So they've not only made a lot of it, but they've also made a kind of mechanical block on the off chance that she's having a good time with somebody else, which is part of why chimp penises are wedge-shaped to try and dislodge the thing. Okay? Because
it's very mechanical.
It's very, we're talking about evolution, right? The body is slow to change. So if you have this kind of competition between males, and if you have female and male reproductive choice competition, you're going to see evidence of it. And that's what I was looking for. So I looked at human vages, like not directly. I'm not a gynecologist, but, I looked at a lot of diagrams and I talked to people. And it's like, okay, well, and human penises, volunteers, not right now, and it's like, okay, well, our balls are kind of Goldilocks. They're not too big, not too small. You know what I mean? They're making a medium amount of sperm. They're investing a medium amount of male-male competition. Seminal fluid does not coagulate and form these plugs. So probably not having, or at least we weren't lucky enough to evolve such a mechanism in our deep primate past. And likewise, we have really boring penises as penises go, like as a species. Like I'm not seeking out other ones. I just mean, it doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles. It doesn't have a lot of things that many phalluses and other species would have when there's certain kinds of competition or when there's a lot of coercive sex, when there's a lot of forced copulation.
Your rhinos like with the lightning bolts. Was it rhinos? You have the lightning bolt penises.
God.
The vaginal canals.
So the phallus and the vaginal cavity co-evolve in every species that has them. That you can't really think about one without the other. So I do talk about dicks a lot in the book because you kind of have to. And the rhino, almost every rhino, has an incredibly large penis. And the reason for that is that she has an incredibly complicated vaginal canal. And so he's left, when erect, with something that's about 2.5 feet long and shaped like a lightning bolt. And it's very difficult for him to kind of maneuver. Also, they're about the size of a car. And so many rhinos are endangered because we're jerks and we poach them. That's why rhinos are endangered. And because of habitat encroachment. Again, jerks, and that's why they're endangered. It's also true that they're really hard to reproduce in captivity. Almost all species. In part because of this incredibly stupid dong he's got. So many programs actually have somebody who's kind of in charge of getting him in the mood.
Rhino fluffer.
I actually read a really beautiful essay about one woman who did that throughout the United States.
She was traveling fluffer.
I mean, she was really good at it. And then the rhinos would get attached to her. It was a whole thing. It was a surprisingly movie essay.
Well, I think maybe we'll move to some questions, unless you have anything that you want to say about the Trump administration first.
That they're scrapping my country for parts. What is there to say?
You talk about this positive moment of research, this pivot to actually being research on women's bodies. And obviously there's been funding rollbacks around all of that. Does that worry you, that this sort of...
Of course it does. Jesus. It should worry all of you more. The NIH was the one of the world's biggest single funders of biomedical research.
Yeah.
And it is being actively dismantled. So if you actually want to know more and improve human health care, even if you're not American, should probably care what's going down at the NSF and the NIH, whether or not you're idealistic, you know. I will say that the only reason my book exists is because literal thousands of amazing scientists fought against the tide to insist on studying female bodies, and now they're having so much more support. And their findings are exactly why the book is as thick as it is, because there is just that much good shit to work with, and it is absolutely being cut off at the knees right now in the United States. The good news is that they're not actively assassinating the scientists, and they are being recruited by other countries. And there is a big push in private funding to keep those labs afloat. But science has been a global enterprise for a long time. It was global even before the Berlin Wall fell. All of the best labs are incredibly cosmopolitan, man. When I was in the PhD at Columbia, you could go into any given neuro lab, any given psych lab. Our postdocs were from all over. Not just China, not just India, all over different parts of Europe. Yes, even Russians. And I don't think that that will change, though that will change in the U.S. and is already changing in the U.S. I don't think that science is going to stop, but it's taken some major hits.
You're optimistic about the momentum?
I think it can do generational damage in the U.S.
Yeah.
I am optimistic that there are a lot of really talented and brilliant people who can do their research elsewhere if we help them do so.
I have an IVF question.
Yes. Oh, I've done it. What do you want to know?
So I have the same pregnancy to child ratio as a bit of a traumatic journey. So ours was male factor, vanishingly few sperm, no issues found with me, and yet all he had to do was ejaculate in a cup every now and again, and it was all very, we need to look at you, need to fill you full of hormones and shove things up you, and it was all very debasing. At the time, I felt very angry about that, and I felt very feminist about it. But from what we're talking about today, I'm wondering, is that enlightenment? Because we're getting a bit of attention.
Please inject me.
Yeah.
Yes. It empowers me, really. Yeah. No, I see what you mean. And sorry for all of the bullshit that involves. I've been there. I thankfully was able to naturally cycle, so I didn't have to do that artificial menopause that many people who go through IVF have to do. But I still had to have a lot of shots. Turned out I had a clotting problem, so I had to inject myself with low-weight heparin to not have miscarriages. I think the main takeaway for why it's so easy for the guys and why it's so hard for us is that in the sex system that we've got for reproduction, the male body just doesn't have to do a lot. And now, male factor fertility does matter, and I'm not saying that erectile dysfunction doesn't matter. I'm not saying that sperm factors don't matter. It's just more that we have to do so much more to make a baby, and so therefore there are more fail points in this incredibly complex system. Oh, and also our ovaries are internal, so you have to have minor surgery just to get the stupid eggs, right? Whereas they can just put it out the pee tube. They can just do that, right? So it is frustrating and seems unfair, but has evolved over so many hundreds of millions of years. I can't really fault my husband for having a really awkward moment with porn while a nurse was outside a door. Yes.
Thank you for a great talk. And I just wondered if you'd like to say some more about misogyny.
So misogyny, it's one of the things I deal with in the last chapter of the, well, it's not like any part of the book doesn't deal with it. It's just, you can't always beat the drum, right? One of the things I always found frustrating as an 80s baby was there's this story in feminism that, well, look, we all know that women are equal and sometimes even more strident enforcers of sexist norms in many, many cultures. And the way that for a while, a certain wave of feminism explained that was, well, that was internalized sexism. It's not even hers. It's like she got forced into her somehow. It was like a bad night and she had a drink and now she's sexist or something. And it seemed very patronizing to me, this idea that somehow it couldn't be your own sexism, it had to be the guy's, and then so that's why women would behave in sexist ways. And so given the frame of the book, I was like, well, my whole job is to think about it like a biologist, right? Okay. And I did say there's a certain subset of sexism. This isn't all of misogyny, but a subset of sexism, which is basically cultural rules for gender norms, how one gender should behave and what that gender is allowed to do in the world, and so on and so forth. And there's a certain subset of those that is really, really important from a biological point of view. So many sex rules, this is what I call it in the book, have to do with regulating access to female bodies. How much of this body can be seen, and in what context, and by whom? How much of this body can be interacted with, and by whom, and in what context? And by the time you get to the actual sex, there are so many rules. And then the baby making, there are so many rules, right? So these sex rules that have to do with controlling access to a female body, right? There's nothing in our DNA that says how long your hemline is supposed to be, and that changes over time. But the fact that we all care about our local sex rules passionately, right? They're a major cultural indicator. You might passionately care about your liberal rules, or you might passionately care about your conservative rules, but damn, you care about them, right? That might be an ingrained thing, to make these rules and care about them. Well, from a biologist's point of view, these rules that control access to female body, well, these are regulating her fertility. They're controlling how many babies she has with whom and when. And then the environment in which that baby carrying, when we've established that our babies need a lot of care, is also culturally shaped. So in that way, deep in our past, I don't mean now, but deep in our past, you can see gynecology and this subset of sexism as two sides of the same coin. They are both working to create local conditions that better keep females and their babies alive with our crappy reproductive systems. If it is innately dangerous to be pregnant, not saying you can't have a healthy pregnancy again, but there's always risk. And in a stone-wielding context, that can be a lot of risk. Well, then those cultural rules might, within your given environment, help more females survive and thrive, just as midwives do. If that's true, then I propose for a long time these two run in parallel in any given human culture. We're always innovating on them. We're always improving our gynecology, hopefully, and we're always innovating on our sex rules. We're always either defending them or changing them, and it becomes a cultural definition thing with cultures clash, those sex rules, what women are allowed to wear is a big thing in France right now. So, but we're always doing that. What's interesting about this moment in history, arriving where we are in our sexist world, where there's a lot of misogyny, not just these kinds, is that gynecology is a lot better at keeping women and girls alive. And sexism seems to do really quite the opposite at this point. It tends to undermine most of the gains of reproductive health care. It seems to undermine most of the gains of women's health in general.
You argue it's a sort of adaptation. We've outgrown it as a use.
Yes.
Yeah.
We can actually now get our heads above water and make choices. Or at least I hope we will. Again, I'm American, and here we are at this moment in history. So,
thank you very much. It's really interesting talk, and I'm sorry I haven't read your book yet. Do you have a theory about why homosexuality continues to occur in the population?
Well, it's present in a massive number of other species. So why would we be the exception? That's usually the first question I would counter it with, right? That if it's so increasingly common to anybody, any field biologist, that sexual behavior is broadly applied in creatures that have sex, and quite often in a kind of reproductive mismatch. That's usually the argument, right? And so then what's the point? Well, actually, it produces lots of different kinds of outcomes depending on the social structures of those species. So I would say there's one particular argument that's really good from a biological point of view. Again, I think all human beings deserve to, live and survive and thrive and have sex with the consenting partner that they would want to have sex with. And that's just just polite way of looking at the world, frankly. But from a biological argument for it is that in such a highly social species like ours, that is so interdependent, no man is an island, no person is an island, that actually it does take a village to raise offspring. And so whether or not it's the case that someone is more sexually oriented towards reproductive likelihood or less likelihood, that doesn't mean that they are irrelevant for the care of that community.
Thank you so much. That was a really fantastic talk. I was just curious about, obviously, as a species, obviously, speaking about we've evolved so much, why is it so that people with, ovaries, uteruses, why have we not evolved so much in terms of giving birth, and why are we still so bad as that?
Yeah. Why does it still suck?
Yeah.
Yeah. Given these almost unimaginable amounts of time in hominin evolution, it's a really important point. Yes. Thank you for making it. Like, millions of years. We can say those words, but we're not really wrapping our heads around that. That's a huge amount of time, hundreds of millions, Jesus, right? But in the millions in which our ancestors have been hominins, apes, but increasingly human-like apes, why does it still suck so much? I think the shortest answer is that evolution produces a lot of suckage, and if it doesn't totally kill you off, and it has any adaptive advantage, at all, there's a good chance it's going to stick around. We're not optimized perfectly, that this is a very janky thing that we call the body, right? I would also say that it may be in part because we're so clever. Isn't that annoying? It may be in part that we improved the survivability of this reproductive system through our collaborative technological suite of behaviors, that we formed these mutually supportive societies, that we formed a deep history of midwifery and fertility interventions of all types and passed on that knowledge, that we made it work, which enabled our species to evolve, but also then reduced the pressure on our janky system.
We corrected the janky system.
We did.
Brains.
Yeah, which then got bigger and then made it harder to push them out the hole.
I mean, it is amazing when a lot of diagrams in the book that show you the sort of various sort of uteri of different animals and the sort of side sections. You think, wow.
Yeah, they're pretty diverse.
Crazy plumbing.
Yeah. Crazy plumbing. Yeah, absolutely.